Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here today to do my Friday Reads video where I wrap up the weekend reading and anything else big that's been going on in the bookish world and all of that stuff. The big thing I'm going to talk about that went on this week is my husband Joel and Erica from The Broken Spine did an interview with Daniel Black, the author of Don't Cry For Me. I'm going to put a link to it down below. I have watched it. It's an hour long, but it is really interesting. Daniel Black talked a lot about what inspired him to write this book and a lot of what went on in this book. And as someone who is a huge fan of this book, I found it all fascinating. Not just because my husband participated in the interview, just because he is a really interesting man and a lot of the plot points and characters and things that happen in this book are very intentional. So it was interesting to hear his thoughts about them. So I wanted to mention that. I've also had a bunch of people comment lately and tell me that they are either listening to this on audio or currently reading it and have been enjoying it, and that has been good to hear. So hopefully more people will discover this. If you want to check out that interview, please do so as well. The other thing I want to mention is that Independent Bookstore Day is coming. That will be on April 30th. I am really excited. If you follow along at all, you know that I really love independent bookstore. I am actually wearing a t-shirt from an independent bookstore in Moscow, Idaho, called the Book People of Moscow. That was a really cute store. If you are ever in the area, I recommend it. They actually had a collection of Franklin Library Pulitzer editions. And again, if you follow along, you know I am obsessed with those. And I didn't know it at the time, but those were actually sold for charity. So the proceeds didn't even go to the store. And if I had known that, I probably would have bought more because, as I said, I am obsessed with those. And I wanted to make sure I brought it to your attention because it is coming. Maybe if there are books you would like to order in advance, that's something you could think about now. I have already ordered 2 books from Montana Book Company because we are planning to drive to Helena for Independent Bookstore Day and pop in there. Of course, it's my favorite bookstore. So I have already ordered 2 books, and hopefully if they are in by then, I will pick them up at that time, and that will be exciting. And yes, at least one of them was from the Booker's International Prize shortlist, Elena knows. So spoiler alert for my future book hauls, that is one of the books that I had ordered. I also said I would update you about whether or not I broke down and ordered a copy of Tomb of Sand by Gitanjali Sri. I did. I didn't last the day. Basically, Joel got home, we were talking, and I mentioned that I had been thinking about ordering it, and he was like, order it. So it's on its way from the UK, and I'm really excited about that. It's gonna be a big book that'll have to fit in, but I'm really excited about it. So yes, if you watched my International Booker shortlist reaction video, which I will link in the description box down below, I did end up breaking down and ordering that book, which is probably not much of a surprise because I mentioned in that video that I'm really looking forward to that book. I'm also going to put a link to a channel that I would recommend you check out. It's Leo Bancroft. I'm going to put a link to a specific video down below. They did a hashtag Stand With Trans Kids book tag. I was tagged in it. I haven't done it yet because I have been doing other videos, some of them which I have been planning for a long time, such as my Gone with the Wind one. So I haven't done it yet. I'm going to try to get to it at some point soon, but it is a very interesting tag for a good cause. And it is a channel that I enjoy. So I would recommend taking a look down there and checking that out as well. And I already mentioned just now that I finally got around to my Gone with the Wind Pulitzer Prize deep dive. Got it posted. It feels like a weight is off of my shoulders because that has been months in the works. I think when I was actually reading the book late last summer, I reached a frustration point where I couldn't even really think about it for a while. So I had to give it a little bit of time and a little bit of space. And then in 2022, when I decided I needed to revisit the idea of doing a video about it, and a dedicated video about it, I had to slowly approach it and think about how I wanted to talk about it and what I wanted to say. It is probably the longest YouTube video I have ever done. So thank you to anybody who has watched it. I'll put a link to it down below if you'd like to check that out. And I was fully expecting there to be an angry reaction because there was a fair amount of angry reaction when I talked about Gone with the Wind late last summer. And I guess maybe you just always prepare yourself for the worst. And yet, so far, reaction has been overwhelmingly positive. So thank you. I guess what's that expression? Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. I definitely prepared for the worst, thinking that I was going to get flamed by comments. I'm sure people will discover it and leave some nasty comments in the future, but for now at least, everything's been really nice and supportive and constructive and really added to the discussion, and I have appreciated that as well. Hi, this is Editing Greg coming back with my buddy Guinness. You can actually see I filmed at the table today because the dogs had completely taken over control of the couch. But anyway, what I forgot to mention was that the relief of being done with the Gone with the Wind portion of my Pulitzer Prize project was so palpable that I posted the following video on Instagram this week, and I wanted to share it as part of a Friday Reads. I'm going to now share that video, and then we will get back to the rest of the Friday Reads. So thank you for your time. Right, Guinness? Want to say thank you? No, he's going back to sleep. Anyway, it's been a long journey with Gone with the Wind, and it's finally over. And then the only other thing before we move into the actual Friday Reads portion of this video, because I have some books I want to spend a little bit of time talking about today, is that they did announce when the Pulitzer Prizes will be announced this year. It's going to be May 9th. So traditionally it's done in April, but for the last 2 years, they have pushed the announcement back because of the pandemic. This year they did push it back, but not all that much. So I don't have to wait until June, and I'm okay with that. So that is when it will be happening, May 9th. I'm really excited. I'll put a link to my Pulitzer Prize predictions video in the description box down below as well, if you would like to check that out. Now let's get to the Friday Reads portion of the video, because as I said, I have a couple of things I want to spend a little bit of time talking about, even though I only actually finished one book. And the book that I finished is the one that I was almost done with in my last Friday Reads video, which is Violets by Kyung-sook Shin and translated by Anton. I really enjoyed this book, and I knew I was enjoying it in my last Friday Reads video, but the last 50 pages were going to be kind of crucial because the plot of the book is really subtle. And the plot description had talked a lot about this sort of relationship with a man as a sort of crux for it, but that hadn't really happened at the point I had left off at in my last Friday Reads video. And it definitely careens to a finale toward the end. And what I will say is it does have a lot of triggers. It deals with depression, it deals with sexual assault, there is violence, and if any of those things are triggers for you, you should be careful of that before going into Violets. But I really enjoyed the book a lot. And one of the things that jumped out to me the most about the experience of reading the book is that Kyung-sook Shin does a really great job capturing city life, because the protagonist, San, is in a very bustling city area. There's always something going on. There are people all around at all times. There's a lot of change and hubbub and all of that stuff. And yet San is intensely lonely. And I thought it was extremely impressive the way Kyung-sook Shin manages to capture how even when you are surrounded by a lot of people, by a lot of activity, you can still feel intensely alone. As somebody who has lived in or around major cities for most of my life, I really appreciated that portrayal and the way in which she captures that. There are a lot of interesting movements in the plot. I had mentioned that the opening chapter felt almost like a short story because it takes place in San's childhood in a small village, and then it jumps to when she is 23 years old and living in the city and she gets a job in a flower shop. And then the story does come back around to the village a little bit in the end, and in a very interesting way. So there's even a payoff for that first chapter, which had seemed almost a little disconnected from the rest of the narrative, but then everything just ties together really neatly. And the portrayal of this woman who is really depressed, doesn't always make the best decisions for herself, and yet desperately wants good things, is really interesting and well done. It reminds me of Luster by Raven Leilani, but without all of the problems that I had with the plotting of Luster. So if that's something that you liked, or Real Life by Brandon Taylor, that was another one that really captured that. I think Violets is a very interesting book. It even goes down to the way violets are used throughout the book. And obviously you are cued to notice whenever violets come up because it's the title of the book. But when they first come up, you think you understand what the meaning of it is. And then they come up again and it sort of changes your impression of it. So the title works on a bunch of different levels. And I thought that was really interesting. And it's also interesting because at one point a character looks up violets in the dictionary and just the words that are around violets in the dictionary end up being thematically important as well, but not in a heavy-handed way. It's a very deft book, but it doesn't show its work, if that makes sense. You never feel like Kyung-sook, Shin, or Anton, the translator, are straining to tell you what you should be thinking about or what you should be getting from the story. They're just sort of effortlessly pointing you in the right direction. So if you haven't read this yet, I would recommend it. I would also recommend Please Look After Mom by Kyung-sook Shin. If you haven't read that, that was the first book of hers that I read, and it was beautiful, I thought. So definitely check this one out. I would recommend it. Once I finished Violets, I picked up my library book of The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois by Honorée Fannone Jeffers because it was due back on April 8th, and I wanted to dive back into it and try to get it back to the library. I've been on a journey with this because I started this on audio and wasn't making any progress because for whatever reason, in the beginning of the year, I just was having a really hard time focusing when I was listening to things, not just this book, but podcasts as well. And I didn't think it was fair to the book, and I didn't think it was fair to me to try and fail any further at the audio. So I put it down, moved to a different audio. I'm working my way back in. So I picked this up. I got, I think 50 pages in. I'll tell you exactly. Oh, only 45 pages in. Honorée Fannone Jeffers is a poet. And I did notice that there is a very beautiful and specific rhythm in the book as it was being narrated in the audio. However, for some reason, I didn't appreciate it as deeply as I do now until I picked up the book. And I don't know why seeing the words on the page brought that up to me much more than hearing a person say it. I think part of the problem I was having with the audio is that I wasn't too enamored of the person who reads the audio, and I'm not trying to throw shade, but especially in one part, when you first meet Ailey Pearl Garfield, who is the protagonist of this book, she is only 4 years old, and the narrator does a kid voice, and I don't like that. So I felt immediately detached from the audio, even though I knew I was liking the book. The reason I didn't get any further than 45 pages is, as much as I was enjoying the experience of spending time with the text of The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, as much as I was enjoying the text of The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, I mentioned in my last Friday Reads video that I was about to start a new audiobook, and I did. And that audiobook is The Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. It's a 25-hour audiobook, and I didn't realize this, but I had checked it out already, and it was going to be due back. It's actually due back tomorrow morning, which will be the day that this video is posted, Saturday. Time means nothing when you post these videos, but point being, it's due back in the morning. And I was not even halfway through about 3 days ago. So I really had to put a push on the audio in order to get through it. And unfortunately, that meant sort of sacrificing my progress on The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. I was able to renew my loan of this book, so I don't have to return it until April 20th, which is good because that gives me time to spend with this book in the future. I'm almost done with Great Circle. With a little push tonight, I should make it. I have a little over 2 hours left, and thankfully it hasn't been a very busy week with work because I've really been able to spend time with the audiobook during the day, which I haven't been able to do a lot in 2022. I'm really enjoying this book. I will say there are two storylines. If you're unfamiliar, this book has been everywhere. I feel like everybody knows what Great Circle is at this point. It was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. It is currently longlisted for the Women's Prize. We'll see if it makes the shortlist. And I mentioned it in my predictions video for the Pulitzer Prize. I feel like the Women's Prize and the Pulitzer Prize are now its last gasp for getting any kind of major award attention since this book was released last year. It'll be interesting to see if it wins either one of those. So if you are unfamiliar, it follows Marion Graves in one storyline. Marion Graves is a pilot. And I didn't know how much of the story would be set in Missoula. I knew that that would be a part of it, but that she obviously travels the world as she grows up and becomes a pilot. A lot of the story is set in Missoula in the first half of the book. And as someone who lives in Missoula, it's really lovely to have a book really spend so much time in the place where you live and talk about the geography. I don't think anybody else who's unfamiliar with Missoula would appreciate those details as much as I did, but whenever they talk about driving down into the Bitterroot, I actually don't live in Missoula. I live a little further down toward the Bitterroot. So it's nice to hear somebody talk about where I live. She talks about Mount Jumbo. She talks about the Clark Fork and the Blackfoot and all of that stuff. And these are all things that I am really intimately familiar. Even when she talks about downtown, she mentions that people go into a bar. And I was thinking in my head, there are a couple of bars downtown that have been around for a very long time. So part of me was even wondering if I could figure out which bar she was talking about. You can't, but it's fun to try anyway. So that part is really fun for me, and I guess it would be for anybody who knows Missoula as well. The other storyline follows an actress named Hadley Baxter in, I think it's the present day. If it's not the present day, it's close to it. And that storyline is less interesting. And I have heard people say that they were less interested in that storyline in the past. I don't think that's a controversial opinion or like a hot take or anything like that. I was significantly less interested in that part of the story, but it was fine because for the first 50 to 60% of the book, the Hadley Baxter storyline is definitely taking a back seat. You spend a lot more time with Marion Graves and her family. Her brother Jamie does get a portion of the narrative as well. Her twin brother Jamie, actually. And now that I'm close to the end, it feels like Maggie Shipstead is making connections to the storyline in the past that are paying off, but we'll see what happens in this last 10% of the audiobook as I get through it. But it feels like she is making this present day storyline worth it in the end, especially since you didn't spend all that much time with it in the beginning. And that part is interesting because what I noticed is when I was talking to Joel about Great Circle the other day and telling him what it was about, I actually spent more time talking about the present day storyline than I did the older storyline, which goes to show that there are really interesting things that are going on in that story. And I think the most interesting thing about what happens in the Hollywood storyline is that Maggie Shipstead manages to really elevate this theme that is present in the Marion Graves storyline, but much more subtly, that a lot of this book is actually about how unknowable we are to each other, because you have this idea that only a small fraction of ourselves is ever expressed to other people. And then eventually we die and it goes away. All of those other parts of yourself are kind of lost. So a lot of the book is about unknowability. And that is a concept that I find extremely fascinating because there's an unknowability among people in our lives and people that we meet every day and things like that, but also history. History itself is kind of unknowable because there are things about people who lived in the past we may never really know. And we as a species have this need to graft narratives onto things, and we could easily be wrong about it. Like one of the things that the Hollywood storyline is managing to show in an interesting way, and I don't want to spoil anything, is that people tend to make an assumption about Marion Graves and the pilot that she was with when she dies. It's almost like Amelia Earhart, almost. She crash lands and is never found. So people make assumptions about her and the person who was with her in the plane, but those assumptions are wrong, as we learn from the part of the story that comes in the past. And I won't say anything more about it from that, but that is a really interesting facet of the story, and I can't wait to finish it. It's a really beautiful book. It talks a lot about being a woman and having agency over your own life, and it talks about yearning and desperation and a little bit about depression and how difficult it is to find your way. And it's interesting as well because especially in the Marion Graves storyline, there are sort of gulfs between people based on location and what they are able to communicate with each other. And I just find so much of this book interesting on multiple different levels. And while at first I was a little bit irritated by the Hollywood storyline, I am coming around to it. in the end, because it does feel like it's adding a lot to the story and the experience of this book. And I am appreciating that. Definitely see why this was such a big contender for the Booker Prize. And I can't wait to finish it and talk more about it next week once I do. So here's my reading plan from here. I'm going to finish Great Circle tonight. I already have another hold available on Libby, and that is Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson. I have been hearing a lot of really great things about this book, and I'm looking forward to it. So that's going to be my next audiobook, and hopefully I'll be done with it by the next time I talk to you, because it's going to be a lot shorter than Great Circle. And hopefully I won't have to make as much of a push to get through it. And once I'm done with Great Circle, I am going back to the love songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. I have until April 20th to finish this. And once this is done, I had been planning on reading Candy House by Jennifer Egan, but I really want to make sure I jump to the LGBTQ in Translation read-along selection for April and May, which is Before Night Falls by Reynaldo Arenas. So once I'm done with the love songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, I'm going to turn my attention to Before Night Falls instead, and maybe I'll do Candy House after that. So we'll see how all of that goes. That's my current reading plan. And I think that's everything for this Friday Reads video. So I'd love to hear what you think about any of the books or things I've talked about, what you've been up to, reading, watching, all of that. We're hoping to get into that new Julia Child TV show this week, and The Great Pottery Throwdown is coming back next week. I am so excited about that. It'll be on HBO Max. I love that show. If you haven't watched it, and if you're a fan of Bake Off especially, definitely check out The Great Pottery Throwdown. It is so good. But let me know what you've been up to, what you've been loving, what you've been hating, what you think about any of the things that I've been reading. And as always, I really appreciate your time, your comments, all of that stuff, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.